Hi there, Paul. A long time ago in a faraway land, a mother disguised her newborn daughter as a boy, wanting to save her life from an atrocious regime that snuffed all newborn girls at birth. But then the girl, all grown, went and fell in love. Tirivashe or Tiri had been born a girl, but immediately after her birth, her mother and the midwife who had assisted in the birth had swaddled her in the furs and clothes of newborns, and declared to all that had waited quietly in the corners of the cave that a boy had been born. There was immediate ululation from the women of the cave, while the father Sungano and his twin Rungano had shoulder-bumped each other before doing a jiggly congratulatory dance. Finally, one of the twin brothers, Rungano, said, "We have a boy in this cave. The last 6 months have been so tough with all the girl births here, and for a while I had been thinking that the ancestors deserted us, left us to rot alone." Sungano, the other twin, laughed and said, "Imagine, what are we to do with girls? It's a good thing that the ancestors have remembered us again." Yet despite the celebrations in the cave, Tiri's mother, Muta, was engulfed in fear as she hugged the newborn closer to her bosom. All that was uppermost in her mind was, what if someone discovers that I lied? What if someone discovers it's a girl? She could only imagine, with horror of course, what would happen to her if this deception was caught. She shivered as she imagined her decapitated head sitting lifeless on the floor, or a spear sunk into her throat right to the hilt, or her intestines pouring out of her abdomen after the slash of a sharp knife. These possibilities were not make-believe, for she had seen them before, after a wife had dared defy the twins. She had seen her co-wives being submerged by head into clay pots of water until they kicked their last. She had seen fellow co-wives being called forward, being handed a spear, then being ordered to mutilate a wrongdoer, and failure to do so leading to them being added on the wrongdoer's list. And these thoughts remained uppermost in Mutsa's mind as she walked to present the newborn to its father the day after she gave birth. Her heart lagged somewhere in her throat, constricting the free flow of air, almost so she stumbled and almost fell onto the ground atop the newborn. And when she got closer, she knelt before them and outstretched her hands towards them to offer them the newborn. "My honorable husbands," she said, her head bowed, "please accept this offering I give to you, a son." And when they had taken the baby from her, she continued, "I would like to thank you, my husbands, for being patient with me after I gave birth to 5 girls and still were willing to try again and again. And as such, our efforts have been successful too, as we have been granted a boy child." And after she finished speaking, she looked at the 2 men under the hoods of her eyes to see whether they would find out they were deceived. She watched as they looked over at the newborn, looking into its tiny face, tickling the full rosy cheeks, running fingers through the full head of hair, and unfurling the little fists that stuck to the air. All Muta hoped for was that they would not peep, not look at the manhood, but even before the twins investigated further, the newborn had scrunched its face and then let out a yell so loud and so powerful that the men hastily handed the baby over to its mother, saying, "Those are strong lungs, strong royal lungs. Now go on, take care of our son and make sure he lacks nothing. He is the first in these caves to be of full royal blood, so he has to be treated with the utmost care." And with gratitude in her heart, Muta had accepted the baby and scrambled quickly to her partition of the cave, where after feeding the newborn, she took to looking at it investigatively to ensure the child was real. 5 babies, the young woman thought to herself. 5 newborn girls who had cried their first cry, then no more, simply because their father, one of the twins, Sungano, had said they were building an army, an empire here in the caves, an empire that would usurp power from the incumbent Gara royalty. The Gara throne is ours, Sungano would say always, after yet another newborn female annihilation, and his brother, who was always by his side, would nod. The previous king stole the throne from our grandfather, but now we want to go and get back what is ours. Us, the rightful kings, and what better way to go than with our own sons accompanying us, fighting for us? Then Sungano would stand, and using his hands would start drawing the future in the air, his eyes with a far-away look. Imagine us on a random summer day, casually strolling into the kingdom and telling the king that we have come to take what's ours. Obviously, the king will laugh and perhaps chase us away, or he will draw arms to incapacitate us. But our sons will be lurking, waiting for our signal, and once we whistle, they will come forth and defend our honor. The unprepared king will be taken aback by our sudden appearance, and thus, whatever resources he might summon in those few hours may be inadequate for our wrath, and just like that, we will take back what's rightfully ours. Then he would sit and take Muta's hand in his, which is why, my wife, it is important that we have only sons, as daughters will only leg us when we attack. And you, my wife, are of royal Gara blood. You should be the one to have a son in this harem, for your son will be of undiluted royalty. So do not cry over the girls, but prop yourself up and get ready to try again for a boy next time. After the first baby had passed, Muta had been distraught, although she had expected it. She had seen some of the other women in the caves go through it. She had heard their whispers as they passed, for the wives were forbidden to speak to one another, and in the whispers, the older, more experienced wives would say, "Make sure it is a boy." But after the midwife had peered at that first newborn and shaken her head, Muta's heart had sank. Knowingly, the baby would not live to the next dawn. So afterwards she had taken herbs, potions that the twin sister Nyarai would make, promising her she would have a boy after consummation if she took the potions. Yet the second time, her heart sank when it was a girl again, then the third, the fourth, the fifth. The midwife, an older wife to one of the brothers, who herself had never given birth and had been appointed chief midwife because of her strictness, had not even allowed Muta to hold, to cradle her creations, but had simply taken them away and snuffed their limbs out forever. Muta knew that her fate would have been different had she been a commoner, for Sungano would have given up and turned his interests on his other wives. But unlike the other women in the caves who had been randomly abducted by the brothers on full moons and who were just ordinary women, Muta was from a royal lineage. Long before the kingdom of Gara had existed, there had been 2 kingdoms, Pata and Gara, who had lived harmoniously side by side. But one farming season, the Pata's crops were struck by a vindictive worm that swallowed sapling and root until nothing came out of the ground, and hunger began to pummel the Patas. So they turned to Gara, and Gara told them that any assistance was to be on the condition of Pata and Gara assimilation, and despite haggling for a moon, the Patas finally conceded. Their one condition, however, was that the kings of Gara and their sons would marry Pata women to strengthen the royal line, and that had become custom. And Muta, being a young Pata woman before being abducted by the twins, had been pledged to marry one of the royal princes. Yet somehow, the twins had been able to break the barriers and security that Muta's father had erected around his home, and in the middle of a full moon festival, when Muta had decided not to go because of period pains, she had been snatched by the burly twins who had come to live with her in these caves, way too far from home, and where Sungano had wifed her. She knew how precious she was to the brothers because of the Pata blood that coursed through her veins, yet she also knew that her continual failure to give them a son would mean that Sungano would keep trying and trying and trying to impregnate her. And she knew too that he wasted no time, only allowing her to rest for 2 weeks after a birth before she was called forth for the next trial. And already there were talks between the brothers that maybe it would be wise for Rungano to try his luck, and maybe she would conceive a son. The talk had repulsed her heavily, but it was Ranga who had come up with the solution. Ranga had been a childhood friend back in the kingdom, and when the two of them found themselves abducted and bound to the caves, they had tried to rekindle their friendship. But Nyarai, the twin sister, the silence enforcer, had seen their ease with each other and their propensity to try to talk to one another, so she had flogged Ranga mercilessly, and Muta had learned to stay away lest her friend would be punished again. But when Muta had become pregnant for the 6th time, Ranga had sought her in the forest as they gathered fruit. By then Ranga had grown to the role of midwife in the caves and helped other women give birth, so as they had knelt behind a bush hiding, Ranga had said, "I can help you keep it if it's a girl." "How?" Muta asked, her eyes lighting up. And then Ranga, after saying, "Trust me," had laid out a plan of how they would seduce the incumbent midwife once Muta had gone into labor, of how she, Ranga, as the only other knowledgeable person in midwifery, would be called forward, and how they would conceal the baby's gender. "You deserve the joy of being a mother too," Ranga said. "Having the tiny being with you will make the caves more bearable for you, okay? And don't you worry, I have everything under control." And that was how Tirivashe was born. Tiri knew from a very young age that she was special, because not only did her mother whisper that to her in the folds of the night, but her father and uncle would always bow mockingly before her, even as a toddler, saying, "Oh, hail, the new king of Gara." And too, Tiri had seen that those bows were reserved for her and no other children in the caves. Tiri knew too she was special because her mother forbade her from interacting too much with the other cave children. "You are a future king," Muta would say to the young girl. "You should not just associate with anyone because the day you sit on the throne, they will treat you as an acquaintance and disregard all you say. So learn to distance yourself as far away from them as possible, okay?" And Tiri would nod. And as she grew into girlhood, she would watch the boys her age go out of the caves to herd cows and learn hunting, and no matter how many times she begged her mother to go with them, her mother would simply say, "You are no commoner, you are royalty." And even when she complained to her father told her, "Listen to your mother, she is right." So her mother became her best friend, seeing as she was not allowed to make friends with anyone, and Muta would accompany her daughter everywhere, to the river to wash, to the weaponry training sessions, to the forest to hunt, and to the healer's hut for any potions. And one afternoon, as Tiri was approaching 10, two of her brothers had laughed at her for forever tugging her mother's waistband. Muta, who had had no children after Tiri, had been livid and had told her husband that the boys were disrespecting the future king. So the perpetrators were called forward, and they, together with their mothers, had been flogged so hard by Sungano that after that no one had openly laughed at Tiri again. But shortly after that incident, Tiri learned again how special she was in the caves when her mother had summoned her father. I know you have been out of touch with the real world and its customs for longer than I have, Mutsa said. But Ngara, there is a custom where the prince, who is the king-to-be, has robes sewn for them, and they wear them until the king passes, and then they sit on the throne. As such, in the spirit of retaining tradition, please get a robe for your prince here. And Mutai had gone on to explain the specifications of the robe. When next the twins returned with the parcel from their forays into the world, they brought a red and gold robe that Muta instructed Tiri to wear always, even at weaponry practice. Let the world know you are the king. Let them not see you like an ordinary person here. And so, in her robes, Tiri cavorted in the caves and in the forests, much to the secret hate and envy that brewed around her. Yet her mother told her to pay no one no heed. It's not like you are not the king to be after all. But the hate and envy also came as a result of your prowess with the spear and with the bow and arrow. Tiri, who had started training from as young as 8, took to weapons like a thirsty man to water, driven by an adeptness and a flourish of the hand that the trainer had begun to love whenever she came for training, once she was in her teens. "And you are here, master, to teach me some new tricks," the trainer would say teasingly, "for there is nothing new for you to learn here. You're now ready for any battle, adept as you are." Yet even then Tiri never stopped training. It was when Tiri was 13, however, that she began to be very aware of the differences between herself and the boys in the cave, and when she, too, began to actively think over these differences in her mind. For while tiny mounds had begun to sprout out of her chest, the boys her age remained decidedly bare-chested. She would watch their chests for days, weeks, moons on end, and yet nothing grew from there, while her chest continued to inch bigger and bigger. "Why, Amai?" she asked Muta one evening as they sat in the corner of the caves. "Why is my chest growing when others have flat chests? Is something wrong with me?" Muta had hit her head with her palm before saying, "Oh, my child, I am so sorry. It is all my fault. You see, when you were a baby, I was supposed to strap your chest in so that you would not grow breasts like a woman. But silly me, I probably did not make the strap strong enough. But it is not too late, child, and your mother has your back. We will begin strapping tomorrow." And the following night, Muta had brought some muacha back and strapped her child's chest tightly. "Make sure you never take these straps off for long," Muta warned, "for they will grow bigger and bigger, and you might end up looking like your mother." And Tiri had been forced to nod under the constrictions on her chest. Muta, realizing that there was no opportunity rather than the present to warn her daughter of what was to come, then asked, "Have you bled yet?" Frowning, Tiri asked, "Bled? What do you mean?" Muta smiled. "It means that the ancestors have smiled down at you, have ordained you." See, Musa drew closer to the teenager she had grown to love so much and took her hands. "One day soon, the ordination shall come. You shall bleed from a place you would never have expected blood from. And when that happens, I don't want you to panic, but to come straight to me so that we celebrate. And two, when that happens, do not tell anyone else except me, not even your father, okay?" When Tiri nodded, Muta continued, "I say this because I know from experience that once people become aware of the ancestral ordination, they will plot to end you. So do not whisper anything to anyone. Promise?" And again Tiri nodded, as she then watched Mucha's demonstrations on what she had to do once the ancestral bleeding started. Musa too was glad for the talk, for it had calmed her down. As Tiri was growing older, she had many questions, and each day Musa was scared that they would be found out. She was just thankful for the vow of silence in the caves, which meant less rumor-mongering, but Musa could only wonder how long that would last. It did not last long for Tiri, however, to find out that she was fundamentally different from the other young men in her home. Yes, the Bloods had come and confirmed her as the ordained king, and yes, she had not told anyone about it. But one day, moons after her first bleed, as she walked alone in the forest, she saw two of her brothers urinating, which was not strange because she urinated too, but only differently. The brothers, instead of squatting like she did, were standing and aiming at the trunk of a tree, each attempting to see whose could get higher, and when they were done, they walked away laughing. After they had gone, Tiri looked around to see if anyone was watching, but there was no one, just herself, and then she found a tree and attempted to do it like they had done, but the whey would not rise, instead dripping to the ground shamelessly until it turned to a trickle that flowed down her thighs, messing her up. She had wanted to ask her mother why, but something held her back. A part of her felt ashamed, like an imposter, felt inadequate that she was unable to do what the others could do so easily, and that scared her. She wondered whether that would affect her chances of becoming king, and she did not want to jeopardize that. All she knew was that she was better than anyone else with the spear, and that even her older brothers revered her, respected her when it came to fighting. So Tiri kept the secrets of her body hidden and continued to isolate herself from everyone else in the caves, and for some strange reason, she was respected for that. Until one afternoon, when she had gone to meet the war trainer with her brothers, just as she had always done. Except this time, the trainer was not the old man who had taught her how to fight, how to paw, how to handle weapons. It was a young man, perhaps 2 reigns older than Tiri, who had just turned 18 reigns old. I am Chamunora, but you can call me Chamu, the young man, whose body was all sinew and muscles, and whose face was all rugged and handsome, spoke, as he paced before the sitting young men before him. I am from a kingdom called Zero, and I have been tasked by your fathers to train you for a war. I trust my father, who previously instructed you, taught you of all the basics, and that is good. But me, I want to teach you how to look straight into the enemy's eyes and how to conquer them with just a strike. I do this because your fathers told me the war is imminent, and before the next rains, you should be back in your kingdom, right? It was news to Tiri, but she nodded with the others, trying to distract herself from the mesmerizing trance that this young man had seemed to evoke in her. For from the moment he had begun speaking, something had begun to stir in Tiri's heart, Tiri's mind, Tiri's body, until it had colonized her entire self. And for Tiri, the feeling felt like a mixture of extreme dislike and extreme attraction with no in-betweens. She felt like she wanted to draw closer to him, yet at the same time push him further away, shove him out of her sight. She felt like stomping his toes, then caressing them, soothing them thereafter. So as she nodded to his words, she hoped that she would somehow right her mind, right her body, and sanity would return. But sanity did not return, for when she looked at him, his eyes were boring into hers, and he was looking at her intently. Then you spoke. You must be Tiri. But Tiri's body and tongue froze, and she neither nodded nor spoke back. Then Chamu laughed. My father spoke so highly of you. He says you are a phenomenal fighter and marksman, but now I want you to show me how good you are. Come. It took a while for Tiri's body to listen to his commands, for the body had become disfragmented from the mind. But somewhere, in the untainted parts of your brain, she had the call to action, and she stood and walked closer to him. Chamu did not even give Tiri a moment to come even closer, for he had struck, aiming his spear straight at her head. Instinct won, and Tiri ducked, hearing the spear whoosh above her head. As she raised her head to confront him with an attack of her own, he was already hand in air, throwing another spear, but this time aiming at her chest. She sprang away, but the fighter in her head had been activated, and without thinking, she too reached for the spear that lay by her belt, and she threw, aiming it at his stomach. He leapt away too, but Tiri had thrown another at his head, which he ducked as he sped towards her, this time drawing the longer spear from the bag at his back. As he lifted it, Tiri had lifted hers too, and she rushed to parry his attack, the two spears clanging loudly in the air. For long moments, the only sounds on the forest clearing were the jangling of metal against metal, as attacker became defender, and defender became attacker, the lines of attack blurring. They fought, leaping with one foot, leaping with both feet, ducking, diving, lunging, avoiding, each motivated to win, and neither breaking a sweat nor panting out of breath, but each holding their own. Then at last, Chamu, in a show of strength, held his parried spear high up and began pushing Tiri's spear and hand further and further back until the force of exertion became too much for Tiri, and she let the spear go, but quickly rushed to retrieve an assegai from her belt. But Chamu, laughing, dropped his spear, stopped her, holding her arm in his, and moving closer to her that there was no space between them. Then he took her chin by his finger, forcing her to look up into his eyes, and he said in a whisper, just for her to hear, "You hold the face of a woman, but your body holds the strength of 10 men. Then he immediately stepped back, and Tiri felt the absence of his warmth as he turned to the ground and began laughing, clapping his hands. All my life, I have fought men of great sizes and girths, but not once have I seen so much strength in one fighter. He then turned to bow at Tiri. Your kingdom is lucky to have a fighter like you, my kind sir. Then turning to the crowd, he said, is there anyone else who thinks they can do better than the prince? Several hands shot into the air, and Tiri was dismissed. As she picked her spears and went to sit with her brothers, she tried very hard to ignore the sear of his hand on her wrist as he had told her, and the almost indelible thumbprint he had left on her chin. She tried to ignore too the unfamiliar fizz of sensation that had rushed through her body, because she knew from its excitement that it was likely forbidden. But as she watched him par and spar with her brothers, she could feel the excitement bubbling inside her, and deep down she knew she wanted to draw closer to him, to breathe in his scent, his aura, his presence, and to feel his hands on her again. That night she did not sleep, fighting the weird thoughts in her head, the sensations in her body. She had known that at some point she would marry, but her father had been adamant that they would only marry once they had fought for their kingdom and defended their land, for now, wives would only distract them. So Tiri knew that she would have to find a woman to love. But then, why was she feeling this way about a boy she had just met? By the time daylight creased the eastern sky the following morning, she had made a resolution. She had already proved she was a good fighter, and therefore there was no need for her to go and train and practice with the others. She would practice on her own, and thus avoid the temptations that the young trainer came with. So in the afternoons, while everyone was at training, Tiri would take off to the deeper parts of the river where no one ever ventured to, and alone she would remove her robes and wade into the water, allowing its coolness to seep into her body, and drift on and on alone until the sun began to set and she would trek up home. As the days wove into each other, her heart, thankfully, began to forget the silly infatuation, and she began to feel better, lighter even, as the thoughts of the young man began to taper off. If I never see him again, she told herself as she took long swimming strides in the water, I will be all right. But fate had other plans as it connived to bring them together again. For one afternoon, as she drifted aimlessly in the water, a shadow fell over her, blocking the sun from her face. Alarmed, Tiri opened her eyes at the same time as she tried to submerge herself into the water as deep enough as possible to hide the back stretched against her bulging chest. And as she did so, her eyes looked up, right into Chamu's face. For a long time, they simply stared at each other, neither speaking, but both connected as though by a string, not leaving the other's face. It was Chamu who broke the silence first and said, "My lady, pardon me for disturbing you during your bath." Tiri was panicked and immediately went into the defensive, asking him, "What do you mean, my lady? I am a man." Chamu laughed and said, "It is okay. You don't have to worry. Your secret is safe with me. I will not breathe it out to anyone." Tiri, still submerged in the water, laughed and said, "Of course you cannot tell it to anyone because there is no secret here. I am a man. I am not a woman." Chamu scoffed, then raised his hands and stepped back. "It is well," he said. "If you insist you are a man, then you are one. It is not my place to argue. I don't argue with women." Then you walked over to the boulder where Tiri had left her robes, retrieved them, and came to place the clothes by the river bank, right before Tiri, before he looked meaningfully into her eyes again and said, "I hope to see you again at practice soon, my my prince." Then laughing, he turned on his heel and walked into the direction of the forest. In that moment, Tiri wished she had a spear and assegai with her, just so she could strike his back, but her weapons were by the boulder. All she could do was pick a river pebble and aim it at him, but it hit his left shin, and he turned to grin at her before he disappeared into the forest. Quickly, Tiri scrambled out of the water, donning her robes despite dripping with water, running to fetch her weapons, and going into the forest using the same path Chamu had used. She searched for him, for his tracks, but there was nothing on the ground. The undergrowth looked untainted. She looked up into the trees, but he wasn't there. He was gone, and Tiri did not even know where, considering the vastness of the forest before her. So she slumped to her feet and allowed normalcy to return, but with its return came the questions that the young man had poked. Was she indeed a woman? Of course, these questions had plagued her a lot since the day he had just begun to bulge, and after she had begun restraining it and still the mounds on her chest grew. Of course, she had wondered why no hair had ever sprouted on her chest, on her chin, why her voice had never deepened, why, despite the camaraderie the other boys had with each other, she had never felt like one of them, and why her mother was so hell-bent on ensuring that she did not associate with them. But the suspicions had been quelled by her mother's insistence that she was a boy. Surely, the woman knew better. Right. Surely, her mother would not risk both their lives by harboring a girl when her father and her uncle were hell-bent on having sons only. No, that would be folly on her mother's part, and this young man was just trying to play with her brain, and it would do her good to ignore all he said and continue skipping class. And in fact, it would be even better if she never returned to this part of the forest after all, for she had no desire to meet him ever again. But that night, the moment she saw her mother cooking by the corner of their cave, despite her misgivings not to ask her anything, she found herself blurting, Am I? Am I a girl? Am I a woman? The response she got was not at all what she had expected, for she had expected vehement denial and refusal and a stern warning for her to never ask the question again. But Muta had simply drooped, and tears had begun to glisten in her eyes, and even without her mother saying a word, Tiri knew. I was tired of not holding my own children, Muta, whose face was now creased with the wrinkles of age, said. I wanted a child too, and after 5 losses, you were the most precious gift I had ever received. For a long time, Tiri did not move as the reality of her predicament set in. Her father and her uncle had already said the throne was hers, and already so much responsibility in the caves was beginning to be conferred to her. She shuddered as she thought of her father's ruthlessness. The man and his brother did not fear bloodshed, and did not mind using it as an excuse for punishment. She had seen them slice off a wife for refusing to obey a command from them. She had seen the oldest brother in the cave run away from home, trying to escape into the outside world, being bludgeoned until he squirmed out of life. She had seen a newborn girl being dangled over a cliff and then let go before the echo of his life splattered back to them. She had seen them rip open gods by their hands and twirl snakes into the air, and she knew that they were fearless enough to pursue a slide to its very end. As she watched her mother now, Tiri knew that any chances of them being found out would mean dances with machetes, but she could see the tears in her mother's eyes and the fear in her eyes too, and Tiri's heart broke. She moved closer to her, abandoning the feelings of anger at her as empathy and understanding fought and won. Then she said, "It is okay, Amai. Don't cry now. I will find a way out of this mess for us, okay?" And even as Mutsa nodded, Tiri remained at a loss, for what solution could there ever be besides fleeing this place? And even if they fled, where would they go? She would have to take time to think of a foolproof solution that would save both her and her mother. In the days that ensued, Tiri became severely distracted. Thoughts of running away competed with thoughts of acceptance of womanhood in her mind. She knew that her new status was a severe downgrade, as all the women did in the caves was bear children and look after them and their husbands. She knew too the competition of affection from the husbands made the women almost dispensable, almost replaceable. Being a man gave her power, gave her strength in the caves. They ate the finest meats that the women prepared, but couldn't eat because they were women. They made decisions as to what would happen to the tribe, when to plant, when to harvest, and they sat in judgment over the smaller crimes that their fathers didn't decide on. They were all better trained for war too, and thus the women, even their own mothers, had to listen to them lest they fell upon the spear. For the twins had always said, "Better a wife goes than a son, for the sons will help us rebuild our land and home, and we can always find other women." So Tiri knew that her status in the family, in the world had changed, and the benefits of manhood could now never be fully hers. She spent her days wandering aimlessly in the forest, trying to think of the quagmire they were in. Should she continue with this life until they left for Gara, and then in the melee of traveling, escape with her mother, or should she and her mother escape now? She knew escaping now was risky and could be derailed, as she knew nothing of the world beyond the caves. She had to stick to the former option, since the final push towards Gara was closer. And one afternoon, as she wandered the forest, she literally bumped into the warmth of a human body. Alarmed, her hand quickly flew to her back to draw her spear, but it was quickly stalled by a warm hand and a soft chuckle. "You cannot beat me, princess. Don't bother to fight." She looked up at the drolling voice and found herself looking up at Chamu, who, with his hand holding hers behind her back, had drawn her into a pseudo hug. Tiri tried not to shiver at his presence, but her body betrayed her anyway, and she trembled. Then sense returned and she squirmed out of his grasp, saying, "Let go." He took a step back and continued to stare at her, his eyes teasing and relaxed. Then Tiri looked him in the eye and said, "I am not a girl." Chamu laughed, but his eyes were serious yet kind. Then he said, "Relax, it's okay. I won't say a word to anyone, and if you have managed to survive this long without being found, then why should I be the devil that exposes you? Besides, I know of the history of your tribe and what happens to girls there, and I feel somewhat proud that you survived. There was so much kindness in his voice and in his posture that Tiri, whose posture had been all belligerent, was forced to calm, and she took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, she felt as though a load had been taken off her shoulders, and even though she was not sure whether to trust Shamu or not, she felt at ease, knowing that someone, besides her and her mother, knew of the secret. She looked at him again and saw the smile that sat easily on his face, and again her heart fluttered. And she understood why it was fluttering again, just as it had done the first time she saw him. She was attracted to him, and that feeling no longer scared her in the same manner as it had done the first time they had met. But beyond that was a safety too, like he was a place she could hide in. And before she could dwell on it too long, she opened her mouth and said, "I've only just found out, after you told me, that is." There was disbelief in his face at first, but it was quickly replaced by understanding and empathy. So he said, "I am sorry. That must have been hard for you. How are you finding it? The transition, that is." Again, Tiri trusted the stranger with her innermost thoughts. "I want to go. I want to run away. If I could do it now, I would. But I can't leave my mother. She means the world to me. And if I leave, she will be punished for it too. I don't even know how to escape with her in a way that does not place us in more danger. I am so confused." And as she said this, she felt a strange moisture fill her eyes, and she quickly swiped it away. Then she looked at him, fear now filling her eyes. "Please, I have said too much. Please don't tell anyone. I know you owe me no loyalty, but please, may you keep this to yourself." Shamu nodded and Tiri whispered, "Thank you," and turned as if to go, but he grabbed her arm and she turned to look into his eyes again. "I promise your secret is safe with me. I would never jeopardize your life. I have a mother and sisters, and I would die to protect them. And if ever you need someone to talk to, you can come here. I will come here every afternoon after practice to lend you a shoulder. Okay?" She nodded, then extricated her wrist and began climbing up the hill to the caves. Tiri did not know how her legs had led her to the clearing she had bumped into Chamu in, but the next day she found herself there, and he was already there, sitting on a rock, as though waiting, while eating a piece of cane. She went to sit beside him, and he looked up at her, smiled, offered her some cane, which she refused. He continued eating, and neither of them said anything to the other, Tiri reveling in the silence which was a reprieve from the loudness of her thoughts. She came again the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, and each day, though their conversations were limited, they carried so much meaning that they both began to feel as though they had known each other forever. Tiri learned of his home, a morning's walk away from the base of the mountain, and how harmonious and beautiful kingdom life was there. Chamu told her of how in the first days there had been animosity between his kingdom and their tribe, and how his king and their father and uncle had eventually brokered peace on the condition that the kingdom would carry out trade for the twins, and the twins would provide a defense force should there be an attack on the kingdom. "I would have offered your mother and yourself a place to hide in the kingdom, but I am not too sure if that is safe for you. Should you run, you should get as far away from here as possible." Tiri nodded and smiled. "Thank you for the consideration." He smiled back, looking into her eyes. "I just want you to be safe always." For a long moment, their eyes remained locked, and again Tiri felt stirrings in her tummy, and a warmth coursed through her body. She wanted to look away, but he raised his hand and hooked her chin lightly with his finger, directing her eyes into his smiling ones. Then he said, "I don't know how anyone would ever have mistaken you for a man, not with all this beauty." All the warmth in Tiri's body rushed to her face, and her mind told her to bolt before it became too dangerous for her, but her eyes remained too transfixed to move. She felt her head, of its own volition, move towards his, and so his too come closer. Then their foreheads touched, and Tiri's body zinged, as though the currents from his body had been transferred into hers. Yet still their bodies craved closeness, so again they moved, until their lips touched, and Tiri could not breathe any more, for the softness of his lips was unexpected, yet supple and sweet. But the magic was interrupted by a rustle of leaves behind them, and the pair broke apart, startled, searching for the source of the leaves. And there in their sight they saw a young boy, Tiri's brother, run from them towards the caves, his tiny feet spurred by the urge to tell on what he had seen. Tiri sprang up and said to Chamu frantically, "He saw us. Let's go after him. Let's stop him." But Chamu laughed and said, "He saw nothing. Besides, we are just two young men who were having a conversation. What would he say about that?" Yet Tiri was not lulled by Chamu's lack of agency. She had been uneasy for the last couple of moons, ever since she had discovered who she really was, and that had changed her lens, changed how she viewed people and their actions and reactions. "I am going anyway," she said. "I want to stop him before it gets too late." And she began to trek up the mountain, but Chamu rose too, and was soon walking by her side. Somehow, with Chamu by her side, Tiri was reassured, and a sense of comfort enveloped her. They walked slowly up the mountain, the sense of urgency forgotten, again both of them reveling in each other's presence. And when they got to the caves, Chamu hugged her tightly, and they bade each other farewell. Yet nothing had prepared Tiri for what was to happen in the caves, for of course the young boy had seen them and had rushed to his mother to tell her of how the chosen prince had been eating the war trainer's mouth, and his mother, having had suspicions of the chosen prince's demeanor, had rushed forward and told the twins of what had transpired, together with her suspicions, finishing with, "You, my husbands, have been blessed with lush beards, and you have passed this to all your grown sons, all except one. Why is it like that?" That had been enough to cast doubt over Tiri. Then Tiri's mother had been summoned, and she had been asked, and instead of defending her position that Tiri was indeed a prince, Mutsa had simply begun to cry. So when Tiri arrived, it was to a gathering of the family in the cave's wall. The mothers and their sons seated on the ground, and the twins seated on their intricately carved thrones, while Musa lay prostrate on the ground before them. As soon as Tiri's father saw her, he bellowed at her, although the disbelief in his eyes was evident. "Come closer," he said. Tiri remained standing, conflicted. She knew that if she decided to bolt now, she would be able to get away, swiftly even, for she was quick and would be able to deflect the few arrows and spears that came her way. But then there was her mother, lying on the ground, her face resigned, and Tiri knew she could never leave the woman she so loved behind. So she walked closer to her father, her footsteps echoing in the hallowed silence of the caves, and when she got closer, she feigned the deepest voice from her throat and attempted to use her wiles to distract her father while she thought of a plan. "What is it, beloved father? What is going on?" But all Sungano said was, "Strip." "Huh?" Tiri said, blinking, still feigning innocence. "These men and boys here are your brothers, and the women here are all your mothers. It shouldn't shame you so much to take off all your clothes before them, right?" Sungano asked. "Baba," Tiri said, willing her mind to work fast. I don't understand what is happening. Did I steal anything? This time Sungano did not respond, but instead unfurled a huge whip, threw it high into the air, and its sharp thwack as it landed on Mutsa's back echoed across the cave. Then turning to Tiri, he said, Strip. When Tiri did not move, the older man said, Well then, I hear you in your silence. You are agreeing that what we have had is true, and so we have the right punishment for you. The punishment you should have received at birth, that of death. Your mother too has dried up, and her juices no longer flow. So the same sentence of deception shall be passed to her, just like you, for the sentence of uselessness. The older man then summoned two of the younger boys. Tie these two up, and then after you are done, create the biggest bonfire outside. Their fat shall be sealed in the fire. But Mutsa called out, Please, spare my child. She has done no crime. She has been exemplary in this kingdom, and she has caused no trouble. Please, take me instead. Save her. But the whole laughed, and the women jeered. Traitor! You wanted to be the special one that got to keep your daughter, right? But no, we are the same. And so Tiri and Muta, bound together, heard the logs being pulled outside, then the crackling of a fire, and then a circle of red light illuminated the cave until it felt like day. Then Muta turned to Tiri and said, I am sorry, Manangu. Tiri smiled and said, Thank you for giving me the best life. And the two were then led outside, where the women and the younger boys had begun a chant, singing as though cheering the already too happy fire on. Then Sungano silenced them, and he turned to the bound pair and said, Do you have any last words? Want to thank us perhaps for the hospitality of caring for a traitor and a daughter, huh? Neither of them said a thing, and Sungano laughed. Well, if there are no last words then, we will untie you, so you will be able to dance freely in the fire. For now, the two of you can decide who goes in first. But no sooner had they been untied had a loud, unfamiliar horn sounded from the east. Everyone stopped, stunned, looking in the direction of the blow. Then the horn sounded again, this time from the north, and again. People's eyes flew to the north, looking for the blower. But the distraction was all Tiri needed, for immediately she grabbed her mother's surprisingly wielding hand, and she dragged the older women back into the cave, and further towards the back where she had found a hidden, yet tiny opening back when she was a boy. And she shoved her mother into the opening, and tumbled into it a few seconds later, and they found themselves standing at the precipice of a mountain. For a moment, Tiri was stunned, unsure of what to do next, but then a hand snaked towards them, and in the darkness she heard Chamu's voice. Come, keep hugging the cave's walls, and come to your right. And slowly they did, until they were off the precipice and onto sure ground. Come, Chamu said, once they stood before him. We have no time. Let's descend. This side is faster, and they will not be able to track us for a long time, because they will use the other route. But we still want to be on time's good side. And into the forest they ran, Chamu and Tiri, stopping every so often to wait for Musa. When they got to the base of the mountain, Chamu said, I can't take you to my home, because it is the nearest kingdom. But I will take you to the kingdom my mother comes from, and there they will receive you with peace. And after you have rested, you can decide to move on or stay. It will be up to you. As they walked, Tiri learned it was Chamu who had blown the horns that had set them free, running nimbly from one post to the next to make the family think that there were many attackers. He told them he knew of a secret tunnel that his father and grandfather, who he had toured through the forest before the twins had arrived, had told him of, and when he had seen them run into the caves, he had gone further up to blow the horn one more time before coming to rescue them. Thank you, both Muta and Tiri said once they had settled in Zambe, their new kingdom. You saved our lives. Tiri and their mother were given accommodation in the new kingdom, and it took them a long while to acclimatize to the way of life there, especially for Tiri, who had spent all her life cloistered in the caves. But there, she allowed herself freedom, removing the bindings and accepting the robes of womanhood she had been given. But her prowess with the spear and the arrow remained sharp, and soon enough she had been awarded the opportunity to train the young men and women of the kingdom in weaponry usage. Yet in the quiet moments when she was alone, she admitted to herself that she missed Chamu, and terribly so. There was not a day she did not think of him, and she often wondered if he was okay, and if he had not been caught by the twins. Yet as the days went by, and she did not hear from him, she resigned herself to the fact that he had been punished by her father and his brother. One afternoon, 2 moons after their arrival in Zambe, she arrived home to hear her mother's laughter peal in the heart. It was not a sound she was accustomed to, so she packed up and approached the heart with curiosity. Then she heard his voice, vibrant and full, regaling her mother with tales. Quickly, she dropped her weapons and rushed into the hut, and he looked up as she ran in, and he too rose, and she sped like queen into his already open arms, tears and laughter fighting to escape her eyes and her mouth. Smiling, Musa excused herself and went outside. Tiri then led him to a bench, and they sat side by side, with no space for even a blade between them, before she said, I thought I would never see you again. He laughed. That would never have happened. I thought of you each day, and every day I counted the seconds until I would see you again. She smiled into his eyes, then solemnly asked, How was it after we left? In the caves? He laughed. They thought it was an act of the Maker, an act of the ancestors. Nobody suspects that you ran away. You are safe here. Tiri breathed out, a large sigh she did not know she had been holding in since they came to Zambe. Then she turned to him and said, You saved me. You saved our lives. You helped me unleash my identity. I will always be grateful. He smiled and took her hands in his and said, I did all that because I fell in love with you. I wanted you to be free. I wanted you to see the world. And I am happy to see you so happy and relaxed here. Now I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Tiri, who was looking at him searchingly, then said, Say it again. He knew what she meant, and with all the meaning in his heart he said, I love you. Meaningfully too, she said, I love you too. They were silent for a long while as they smiled into each other's faces. Then she asked, What about your job? I left. I couldn't look at it the same. And also, an anger set in my heart about the lives of the many young girls there. I told them I was traveling and bade them farewell. Now, he smiled at her again. I arrived here in Zambia in the morning and asked the king for citizenship here. I hope you won't feel cramped with my presence here should that be granted. Cramped? She laughed. I am so happy that you are here, and I want to love you from a place as close as possible. He smiled wider. And I want to love you forevermore. The end. Thank you for watching and listening all the way to the end. This story is part of the survival series that is linked above in the playlist there. And if you liked it, then you might like the previous stories that are linked there. Also, if you haven't already, I humbly request for a subscription and a like and a comment. But anyway, lots of love in the meantime and see you in the next one. Bye.